Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, we review the draft as the Mets had plenty of selections to work with. Later on, we talk about the state of the big league club and what they need to do out of the All-Star break. As always, we close out the show answering your mailbag questions. So subscribe to the Mets Pod on Apple Podcast, Spotify. You could watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. This summer, step out of the office and into the iconic with Cadillac, where the Made to Move sales event provides all the inspiration needed to set your email status to away. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac showroom for the Made to Move sales event today. And here's your reminder to subscribe to our show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo, who, listen, Joe, I'd like to say you're the man of the hour every episode, but it's a little amplified on this one because it's our classic MLB draft recap. There is nobody in the business better than you at not only recapping the Mets draft, but hearing you talk about prospects as well. We know how long you've worked on this. This was a big draft for the Mets. We're going to talk big league club today. We're going to get there. There's a lot to go through as the Mets come out of the break and have to operate with urgency. But right now, all eyes are on a draft where the Mets had some extra selections thanks to the compensatory rounds, but it felt like they kicked things off with the splash, which I think was a bit of a surprise for all of us with Colin Houck, the shortstop, high school shortstop out of Georgia at the end of that first round.
Definitely surprising that Colin Houck made it all the way down to 32. But this is a credit to the Mets scouting department. And they've done this now 2 drafts in a row where a player has fallen to their spot where they did not expect it. Kevin Parada in 2022, Kumar Rocker in 2021, and now Colin Houck here in 2023. And it's not like the NFL draft. I'm a Cowboys fan. CeeDee Lamb fell into their lap a few years ago at 17. They just draft CeeDee Lamb. There's money involved in this discussion. So they have, maybe a 10-minute window or so to be on the phone with Colin Houck's advisor and Colin to see, 1, do you want to sign? 2, what will it take to sign? Can we make those numbers work? And then have to decide to make the draft pick on the spot. So there's a lot of moving parts, but being able to draft Colin Houck, who Keith Law at The Athletic had as the 10th ranked prospect in the class, MLB Pipeline had him at 12. This is a guy with above average tools across the board, still has some room to fill out. He's currently a shortstop. I figure long-term, he's probably a third baseman. And that above average raw power, as he physically matures, there's a lot of thought in the scouting community that he's going to become a plus power guy. So this is, to me, just simply taking the best player available. Everyone knows the Mets need pitching in the system, and there was a lot of thought that they would take a pitcher at number 32. But credit to them sticking to their guns, trusting their board, and doing the prudent thing, taking the best player available, and then afterwards make the bonus pool work around whatever it'll take to sign Colin Houck. But they kicked off certainly with a bang, and it's a big credit to them to be prepared to be able to do that. And Colin Houck certainly has sky high upside. I mean, this is, if he could put it all together years down the road, you could be looking at a potential all-star caliber third baseman. That's the type of talent he is.
18 years old, 6'2", 193 pounds, Parkview, Georgia, powerhouse kind of program for high school baseball, committed to Mississippi State. And it felt like, Joe, he was the guy. And I mean, we kind of, you've highlighted this, stats can be, not meaningless, but doesn't tell the big story of the prospect. But still, I mean, Georgia Gatorade Baseball Player of the Year last year that hit 487, 8 home runs, 50 RBIs, scored 56 runs. Obviously the offensive output's amazing. I've noticed his highest grade in most places was actually on his arm strength, which, kind of tells you that if it's not long-term shortstop, but ultimately third base, that maybe that transition there would be fine. And for those watching the draft, you could feel it once they got into the 20s. The best available was Colin Houck over and over again. And you sit there and go, is this guy really going to make it to the Mets, who are picking outside of that 20s range? And he ultimately does. They pull the trigger on talent. And like you said, Joe, there's more to this where you also have to find out can we sign the player, or is he at this point of the draft going to follow through with his commitment? So exciting raw tools, and of course, an exciting guy to get into the system. Joe, what did you see with the tools from the high school player? And of course, also, where is he going to maybe slot in? Not, I don't need a definite number, but range where he'd slot in terms of how you rank Mets prospects right now.
So that last part I have to figure out because I have to submit that here by the end of this week. So I have to figure that out here in the next couple days.
Clock's
but I
ticking,
imagine,
Joe.
yeah, I don't think he will be the number one player. That's probably going to be Kevin Parada. He'll be in the 2, 3, 4 range in the Jet Williams, Ronny Mauricio bag. So he'll be kind of in that range. But overall, tool wise, the arm, like you said, Connor, is something that really stands out. And I think he'll shift to third base long term. He could play shortstop. I believe the Mets plan is to send him out as a shortstop at least until he gets his feet wet in pro ball. And when you look at stats, especially high school stats, even in the state of Georgia, which is a baseball powerhouse type of state, most teams are not going to pitch to Colin Houck when he comes to the plate. So high school stats certainly can be misleading, but this is a real tool shed. A lot of times when you're looking at high school kids, you see their bat over field or their field over bat or power over hit. And he has a little bit of everything. So that's, I think, what makes him so intriguing. And being able to get him at 32, the Mets were very fortunate to have that the board fall the way for them.
So in the second round, they go through with their mission of trying to start to stockpile this system with some arms. We've heard all the way at the top, Steve Cohen talk about this, how badly they need to develop pitching. And it was funny, had the draft on still at this point, and my fiance looks at me and she's like, do you even know if they take anyone? Like, would you know a single person? And I was like, well, they just took the one guy that I know a lot about because they took him last year, and that's Brandon Sproat from Florida. They were unable to sign him when they took him in the third round last year. And they take him in the second round this year. Obviously, he granted them permission. You need to give the teams permission to draft you again. Pick 56. I know MLB.com had him as prospect number 54 overall, 6'3", 215 pounds, was 8-3 in 19 starts for Florida, a great baseball program this year. The 4.66 ERA, I mean, guys just hit like crazy in college. You don't really get too overwhelmed by an ERA in that range. But Joe, this is just a dude that it's all about the stuff. I know you've talked about this. The Mets open up the pitching lab. This is like the prototype almost that you want to throw into the pitching lab. And hey, how much more can we squeeze out of this guy to make him a mid-rotation starter? Because we've seen the fastball hit triple digits. I'm assuming it's probably going to sit mid to high 90s consistently. We know he's got the slider as well. He is a strikeout pitcher, but finding control and really sharpening these tools that he has. But still, the fact the Mets drafted him twice now kind of shows you how much they like the traits of Brandon Sproat.
I thought you were going to say the Mets' mission was Brandon Sproat's going to be in this farm system one way or another. No matter how many times we have to draft him. But redrafting Brandon Sproat, like you said, Connor, it's about the stuff. There are some things that still need to be tinkered within the stuff. The fastball sits 96 to 98. It'll get up to 101. They definitely will want to work on the pitch shape a little bit because it does get hit a little more than it should given the velocity. So I do think there's some work that can be done with the fastball. What was big for him this year on the positive side, and then I'll get to a couple things that didn't go so well. His changeup, which was kind of an almost non-existent pitch last year when the Mets drafted him, is now probably his best secondary pitch, and it flashes plus at time with serious fade on the arm side. His slider, when it's on, is above average. I would say it actually took a little bit of a step back this year than what it was last year. So between all that stuff, it's a guy that you potentially could have 2+ pitches and 1 above average pitch, which is plenty to work as a big league starter. He's going to need to work on his control and his command. So his walks were up a little bit this year, but the big thing, his command within the strike zone. He needs to make better strike decisions when he's throwing strikes because his home runs went up from 5 to 15 this year. So significant jump in home runs allowed. Some of that is the competition and aluminum bats and college, etc. But when you look at Brandon Sproat, this is a kid that I think has the ceiling of a mid-rotation starter, maybe even a little more if you can really maximize that fastball and turn it into a true plus offering. His floor, if the control and command don't totally get there, I think he's a high leverage reliever at the very least. So I think they drafted a future big leaguer in Brandon Sproat. A little bit of a wide range of outcomes, but really high upside, especially given you're drafting a college senior. Like, he has his degree, he's done. It's not very often that college seniors possess upside. Brandon Sproat is an example of one that does.
The last individual guy we'll talk about right now, and then we'll kind of open the floor here, Joe, and bounce around the draft, because as people know, the MLB draft is insane. The amount of picks are made. So we won't just go from top to bottom. But Nolan McLean from Oklahoma State, pick 91 overall for the Mets, right-handed pitcher and outfielder, and a guy that, by all accounts, seems to have big league power. He also has immense swing and miss ability going on right now. I believe when he was a sophomore, he struck out 107 times. That was a D1 record on 64 games, but insane power. He was drafted by the Orioles last year as a pitcher. A lot of analysts and scouts have talked about how pitching is his long-term home as much as he has insane home run power. Joe, I'm already giving him the nickname coming out of Oklahoma State. This is Cowboy Ohtani right here, Nolan McLean. And what's pretty cool here for the Mets, a lot of people thought no matter where he got drafted, it would be, okay, time for you to focus on being a pitcher, probably a reliever. The Mets have been public that they are going to let him try to do both and maybe cut down on some of that massive swing and miss, because the potential rewards in terms of how much raw power this guy has is worth trying that. We know, is somebody that seems very interested in trying both. And Joe, also the upside with his arm as well. So what did you think of this third round pick of a two-way player?
Like you said, he was a third round pick by the Orioles last year, and something happened with the post-draft physical. So we'll want to keep an eye on the medicals. I don't know exactly what occurred, but obviously the Orioles weren't comfortable and they let him go back into the draft this year. Like you said, Connor, he actually prefers hitting over pitching. But this is some of the best raw power in the class. He hit a 470 something foot home run this year to right center.
Cowboy Ohtani.
Problem is, he struck out in 37.3% of his plate appearances this year. And that's obviously not sustainable. And you imagine in pro ball, that's not something that would get better than it was in college. But certainly the Mets have the plan to let him try to play both ways. His upside is definitely more as a pitcher, where he's been a reliever at Oklahoma State, and he sits 94 to 96. He'll touch 98. He has a slider and a curveball, both power pitches that flash RPMs near 3,000. So these are potential plus offerings. So he has the potential for 3+ pitches. The only thing is, he's been exclusively a reliever at Oklahoma State. So you wonder if would the Mets consider trying him as a starter, which is something they've done in the past. Christian Scott and Tyler Stewart, two of the best performing pitchers in the Mets system this year, were actually college relievers that the Mets drafted and transitioned over to be a starter. So it'll be interesting to see if they do that, what that does to his stuff. Or do they just look at him as, this is a potential high leverage reliever and let's push him as that and not try to tinker with the starting and, maybe mess with the stuff, maybe add some injury risk. But either way, it's as intriguing a pick as I think as you can make, because the Mets haven't drafted a two-way player, to my recollection, ever, and certainly not given that two-way player an opportunity to be that, because most kids in high school and maybe some in college do play both ways, and then they just get drafted as one, and that's the end of that. But I think a big factor that they were willing to allow him to play both ways, because a lot of teams want him as a pitcher, but he wants to hit too. So the Mets will give him a chance, and we'll see how it goes going both ways. But I do think his long-term home likely is just as a pitcher.
Opening the floor here, Joe, to the rest of the draft. Obviously, the 3 picks in the top 100, there'll be significant eyes on them, especially since both pitchers are college guys. It'll be interesting to see how they can progress through the system, whether that's rapidly or not. Houck, because he's such a high-end prospect, even though he's an 18-year-old, a lot of eyes on him, of course, because the talent's just immense. But what were some picks that maybe intrigued you outside of the top 100 selections, whether it's a guy that you thought, hey, I didn't, think he would make it that far, or it's, hey, maybe this guy was overlooked, or maybe somebody that has just more of a pro readiness, maybe a limited ceiling, but a pro readiness? What are some guys outside the top 100 that you said, okay, I'm going to watch them a little bit closely in this Mets system now?
Yeah, there's a few. So I'll try to do cliff notes on them all, so to not make this too long of a segment, because I can talk about most of these picks. The compensation pick that they actually got for not signing Brandon Sproat last year, which is pretty funny that they got a compensation pick and then they drafted the guy again. Cade Morris, a right-hand pitcher out of Nevada. This is another one, Connor. If you look at his stats, you're not going to feel overly impressed. ERA over 4. But the thing is, what you're looking for is the tools. He'll sit 93 and 94. He'll touch 97. He has an above average slider and an average changeup right now. Scouts believe he should scrap his fourth pitch, which is a curveball, and just focus on the two secondaries of a slider and a changeup. And the Mets believe this is a guy that if you get him out of the elevation of Nevada, you may see a little better results and certainly, a tick up in stuff. So he's one.
Remember when the AAA team was there? The numbers that we would see?
Yeah,
it's awful.
It's ridiculous. So tough to operate in that area of the country. So get him out of that high elevation. I think Cade Morris is someone definitely to keep an eye on. I believe Keith Law from The Athletic pegged him as a future number 4 starter potentially. So that's certainly one to watch that they took just outside of the top 100. Fourth round compensation pick that they got for Jacob deGrom. They took a shortstop, AJ Ewing. Not related to Patrick Ewing, but same last name, from Springsboro High School in Ohio. He was a bit of a later riser in the draft process, had a really big spring. Undersized guy, but well built at 6 foot and 175. He has big time bat speed, big time hand speed, pull power, very surprising for his size, shows the ability to barrel the ball up. Obviously has a lot of work to do on the hit tool and pitches away, but if a ball is in his wheelhouse, he shows the ability to jump on it. And there's actually a video that I tweeted and is out there on Twitter of a ball he absolutely crushed probably 30 feet over the fence. And the camera pans towards the ball and you just see a bat go flying across because of a sick bat flip that he dropped. So he's one I think to watch. 5th round, Zach Thornton, who they drafted, a left-handed pitcher from Grand Canyon. This is a really interesting pick to me that maybe went a little under the radar. He has a very projectable build at 6'3", 170. Certainly some room to add some bulk. He has a deceptive delivery right now that makes it hard for batters to pick it up. And right now, the biggest thing is he is plus control and command. So he knows how to throw strikes, and he throws good strikes. But he's more pitchability over stuff. It's 89 to 92 on the fastball right now. He'll touch 94 on occasion. He has an above average slider and then a couple average pitches in his curveball and changeup with some physical maturation. And maybe he's a guy you stuff in that pitching lab and you figure out some mechanical tweaks and give him some food, get him a little bigger and stronger. Maybe there's a little more velocity in there. And one more that I'll touch on. In the 8th round, they drafted Boston Barrow, a shortstop from a high school in California. Baseball America actually had him ranked as a top 100 prospect in the class, and the Mets took him at number 246 overall. He's a wiry 6'1", 175-pound frame. He's a line drive approach. As he physically matures, there's some thought he could maybe get to average power, but it's bat the ball skills. It's a strong athlete, good instincts in the field. And the Mets will have to sign him away from a UCLA commitment, which if they're able to sign him, probably will be an overslot deal because UCLA is one of those schools that are typically pretty hard to pull a player out of, especially a local kid. And, I'll hit one more. Bit of a local tri-state area native, Nick LaRusso, who they
I wanted to ask you about him because the raw stats are jaw-dropping from this guy.
The raw stats are there. He's a Monroe, Connecticut native, so tri-state area. Went to Villanova. He put up one of the better seasons in college baseball. Like you said, the raw stats, 379 average, 446 on base, 26 home runs, tied for the NCAA Division I lead with 105 RBIs. And most of those stats were Maryland records. The thing that makes it intriguing, despite being a 23-year-old, fifth-year senior sign, there's some metrics behind this. It's not just putting up stats. He averaged 92 miles an hour on exit velocity. So this is a guy that knows how to barrel the ball and hit the ball hard. Obviously, at the age of 23, he's going to have to make a pretty quick impression. But the Mets did a good job in this draft, and you could talk about Noah Hall, 7th-round pick, right-hand pitcher out of South Carolina. You could talk about the 10th-rounder Christian Prejean from Stetson, the home of Jacob deGrom. The Mets did a good job this year of the senior signs that they're getting. Typically, those are guys that are just pure money savers. It appears there's actually some unique tools with some of the seniors that they pulled off in the top 10 rounds.
That is exciting, and I like that you brought up Prejean. I mean, he's got that identity as this defensive catcher. Maybe you look for a long-term backup, and if you get that, as we say, if you get that in the 10th round, or you hit on anything in that 8th, 9th, like we always talk about Mike Vassell on this podcast and the adjustments he's been able to make as a guy that wasn't taken in the first couple of rounds of the MLB draft. That's how scouting departments can really gain an edge for the farm system, of course. And be sure to check out all Joe's draft coverage at SNY.TV. And since many of these new prospects will find their way to the Brooklyn Cyclones, we want to give you a heds up that if you're thinking of finding your way to a Cyclones game this weekend, there's post-game fireworks on Friday, plus a $20 ticket special that includes 2 24-ounce beers or seltzers. On Saturday, the first 1,500 fans will receive a Yellowstone Dutton Ranch jersey. And on Sunday, there's a Cyclone soft cooler giveaway for the first 1,500 fans. The first 500 kids will receive free Dippin' Dots, and also post-game kids run the bases. For tickets and full details, visit brooklyncyclones.com. All right, Joe, as we record this show, the All-Star break has started to wrap up here. We saw the Home Run Derby, the All-Star game. A lot of different mixed opinions on the actual All-Star rosters this year. But, of course, we weren't going to do this show without hitting on both of those real quick. Pete Alonso in the Home Run Derby again. Unfortunately, in Pete's words, he ran into a buzzsaw in Julio Rodriguez, who put on a show for the hometown crowd. Pete, not his best showing. I think a lot of it can be pointed at that it felt like Myers, who was throwing him the pitches, might be a good add to the Mets bullpen with the corners he was hitting. Not the best showing for Pete in the Home Run Derby, but still a fun event. And Kodai Senga not pitching in the All-Star game despite being an All-Star.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I didn't make it through the whole Home Run Derby. It lacked
a lot of juice. I'm going to be honest with you. Besides the crowd during Julio's first showing, and only the first, and great crowd, I don't know what they got to do. Something just feels a little off with the Derby right now. And I don't think it's they're getting stars to participate. They don't have like the dunk contest problem where nobody wants to do it. That's a superstar. I think there's, whether it's the broadcast, sometimes you couldn't see the ball, which is half the fun of watching it. It feels like the Derby, and I love the Derby. I'll always watch the Derby. I prioritize the Derby significantly over the game. I don't know what was missing this year, but something was missing.
Yeah, you didn't see a lot of the balls. They just kind of kept the camera on the hitter, and they would just flash the launch angle and exit velocity, and then just the next pitch would come, and then they'd flash over to the ball, and then they'd flash back. So a little weird from a production standpoint, but yeah, Pete Alonso ran to a buzzsaw. J-Rod has now taken Pete out in 2 home run derbies, and I don't know how many more home run derbies Pete wants to do, but there was some suspect pitching there in the first round of the Derby. I think Adolis Garcia certainly had some trouble with pitches thrown his way as well. So the Home Run Derby is a fun event. Still into it, and big ups to Vlad Guerrero for taking it home. But yeah, that was something I accidentally fell asleep during. I didn't try to. I thought I was going to make it through, and I did not. All-Star game doesn't really get me going like it used to. Like, I watched a little bit of the beginning. I don't know who designed the National League uniforms. Those were
they got to wear
ideal.
Their jerseys. They got to wear their jerseys. Enough is enough. This is horrible.
Yeah. Let's just go back to wearing the jerseys. The AL team should wear all their white or whatever their home jerseys are, and the NL should have worn all their away jerseys, and you just move forward. Easy enough. But I didn't watch enough of the All-Star game. I just saw Adolis Garcia and Randy Arozarena just make a bunch of jumping catches at the wall. But yeah, the All-Star game's cool. I'm frankly pretty glad that Kodai Senga didn't pitch, because that lines him up to be able to pitch in the Dodgers series. And I give him some props for his reasoning. He said his goal was to be healthy for his whole rookie season, and he doesn't want to disrupt that. And he appreciated the fact that he was there. But he also has the goal that going forward, Kodai Senga is just known as an all-star. So I think he has that confidence that this isn't the last time I'm going to be here, so I'll survive not pitching this time.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear Senga after the game, how focused he is on the second half of the season for the Mets. And I think a lot of Mets fans were really happy for Senga. He earned to be at the All-Star game, but I think it's also the right move for a guy that you have to, especially this year, his first year pitching over here, you have to manage so closely the rest and how, listen, I mean, we're going to get into it in just a second. The Mets got to come out of the gate firing after the All-Star break. There is no room for any loss of a competitive edge. And Senga, who's been their best pitcher and their most consistent pitcher, is a massive, massive part of that. So we will get there in one moment. But a reminder, you're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. And with that, Joe, it is time to talk about the state of the Mets. Nice 6-game winning streak. It was good to see them finally get a little bit momentum going. I think some of the air was taken out of the room with how they finished against San Diego, where it felt like after the throttling they put on an extra innings in the Friday night game, it's like, okay, the Mets really got it rolling here. Now you'd love to, win all of them and go on a what? It would have been an 8-game winning streak. You'd love to pull that off, but you really looked at it after Friday and said, win 1 of 2. You take another series, which was, they couldn't win a series in June. And then in July, you're not losing any series up until that point. And then you come out of the All-Star break and you keep stacking series. If you keep going 2 out of 3 here and there with a couple of sweeps mixed in, you're right back in it. You don't want to overreact to 2 losses, but man, that stung, Joe. It stung a little bit because it felt like just one win there. And the Mets momentum shift is totally different from where they are right now, where the urgency that they have to play with out of this All-Star break before the trade deadline is, I mean, we can have the season decide in what, a 10-day swing? It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're right up against it because not only are you have to decide if you're in it, that decides whether you're buying or selling come the trade deadline. Because we talked about this when we were together, like kind of the worst case scenario is the Mets kind of like hover somewhere in the middle and end up doing a little bit of nothing. Like they don't feel confident enough to buy, but they don't think they're out of it enough to sell. But certainly it would have been nice to take 2 out of 3 from San Diego. I'll tell you, after winning 6 in a row, I was hook, line, and sinker. I was pulled right back in. I was like, they're just turning it. Yeah, they're just turning it back on in July. It was fundamental baseball. It was comebacks. It was good pitching. Like it felt like I was watching the 2022 Mets all over again. And then, of course, San Diego ended in some disappointment. And they have to come out hot. There's no way around it. We talked about it when we were live together at the Cadillac Club. They had to rally off a bunch before the break. They did that. Could have used one more win, but now they have to come out, guns ablaze and ready to go right out of the break. Because if they lose a couple series right out of the break, Billy Epler's phone is going to start going to contenders saying, we have some pieces available to help you win. And I don't think the players in the clubhouse, the coaching staff, or the front office want that to be the case. But Steve Cohen made it clear at his State of the Team press conference that he has prepared his management team for whatever the results are of this month. So the pressure's on the players, the pressure's on Buck Showalter and the other coaches. They need to get the job done right out of the break. Otherwise, you're going to be seeing some guys leave the clubhouse that maybe you don't want to.
That's exactly right. So they're going to come out of the break and they're going to see a Dodgers team that, if they put Clayton Kershaw on the IL. So maybe a little bit of Kershaw, for those that have not been following, Kershaw has been magnificent this year. He really has looked like vintage Kershaw. So we'll see if they miss him in that 3-game stretch. You got the White Sox that have had their own problems. Of course, you're going to run to a Boston team that can definitely hit, and then 2 at the Yankees, where you expect Aaron Judge to be back, although there's definitely still some mystery looming there. And that those 4 series, Joe, I mean, are probably really going to dictate, let's be honest, if Tommy Pham, whose imaging came back in a positive way, it sounds like there's not a significant groin injury. It seems more on the day-to-day side, although you never know, but the imaging came back negative where there's nothing overly concerning there. We've talked about Robertson a lot and how much of a valuable piece he would be at the trade deadline for a team this year. I mean, let's be real. Those are 2 of the biggest contributors on this team right now, and they are the 2 trade chips. And if both those guys go out the door, the Mets' odds of pulling off a big second half of the summer swing really, really decrease. Now, what I will say, to not completely lose this in the shuffle of the All-Star break, the draft, and the series ahead, you could always take out long-term outlook things, even when everybody cares about the short term. And what I mean by that is everybody cares right now about the Mets making this season interesting, getting back into the wild card hunt, as they should. The long-term outlook, though, this is something that has a bigger effect, not just on that, but for the next at least half decade. Francisco Alvarez looks like a superstar and a difference maker at a position that, if you were opening up, say, like an MLB grid and all-star catcher was two of the things. Seriously, like there's not a lot of guys in the league that are year after year that kind of player. We've talked about that with Real Muto for a long time. We know what kind of player Adley Rutschman is. But Alvarez, in terms of the raw power, some of the athleticism behind the plate, if it starts catching every pop-up, he's going to be in a great place behind the plate. But the framing, the arm, the athleticism, but the raw power and the clutch factor, which has been a little bit of a problem for the rest of this team, that's a long-term thing, Joe, that people should be really, really excited about right now for a 21-year-old player.
A 21-year-old catcher is so uncommon to just be in the big leagues, forget about contributing at the level he is. And his confidence level has always been so high, dating back to when he's in the minors. And that's what you see in those big moments late in games when they're down to their last strike against Arizona. And he's able to take a ball the other way off Andrew Chafin for a home run. Like, that's a guy that's confident in every count, in every situation. And that's exactly what you want in a young player going forward, because there's no stage that's going to be too big for him. Just think about it, right? Like, 21-year-old catcher playing in New York City on the Mets. He was the #1 prospect in baseball. He has had basically pressure on his shoulders since he was 17 or 18 years old. And he's made it up to the Mets at 21. And he's showing everything that you want to see. Would you like more batting average? Sure. I think he's had really great times, tough times. He's it's what's normal for young players, where the league adjusts to you. You have to adjust back to the league. So now it's kind of like a chess match. But Alvarez has been unbelievable, and Mets fans should feel very happy that he's under team control for a long time.
And now this happens with or without the Mets being in the hunt. He's chasing the Johnny Bench rookie catching home run record right now. And when the conversation is Johnny Bench, it's a little different, right? It's pretty special stuff. So for Alvarez, we'll see if he can get there. I believe 27 would be the number that would set the record for him. We know Alvarez has 30 home run potential. I remember our conversation before the season, Joe. We said, how do you add power to this lineup without going out and making a massive addition to the lineup, right? And I believe we had that conversation before or after the Correa deal ever was a thought. And something you and I really unified on was the Mets got 6 home runs out of their catchers last year. I believe it was 6. And that's everyone combined. McCann, Nito, everyone combined. 6 home runs. And forget how bad the offensive numbers were as a whole. We said if Alvarez adds 20 to 22, that's a surplus right there that makes a massive difference on your team. Well, right now it looks like Alvarez, don't want to get over your skis, but Alvarez can legitimately be a 30 home run player at 21 years old. And even if he gets to 25, that's an incredible season for Alvarez. So we're excited to keep an eye on him on the second half, no matter what the Mets do and how they come out of the gate here. And that brings us, of course, to our mailbag to close out today's show, a draft-heavy show. Of course, Joe doing a great job covering it. Once again, if you haven't gotten a chance, read all his work at SNY.tv. And Joe, some of the questions will continue on the system here. This first one is from Alec. He said, Alex Ramirez fell off a lot of the top 100 lists and seems to be struggling at the same league he was holding his own in last year. Is there any concern there?
Yeah, I mean, it's never good when you're repeating a level and your results are not as good as they were the year before. So Alex Ramirez has certainly had a tough first half for Brooklyn. The tools are still there. Like, he has at bats where you see the plus power. You see him chase down balls in the gap over his head to center. So he's flashing the tools. He just has not put the product together yet. And obviously there's a whole nother half of baseball. And if Alex Ramirez goes ahead and has a big second half for Brooklyn, I think he'll find himself right back on those top 100 lists. He's someone that I was high on coming in. I think I said when we were at the QBC, and I said when a couple other shows, that I thought he was a top 100 guy that could elevate to be a top 30 type of guy. Unfortunately, his first half has been disappointing by his measure, and certainly I had more expectation for what he would do. But he has another half of baseball to turn it around, and the tools are still there. They're still flashing. They just need to flash at a more consistent basis.
Without a doubt. And as we've learned, I mean, this is someone who's still 20 years old. He's not turning
Yeah.
21 until the middle of January. So 20 years old. And as we learned with Ronny Mauricio, young players they just go through these things sometimes, and you don't want to quickly write them off because they fall off a couple lists. I think, that power speed combination is still there, but you would like to see more consistency as a hitter, of course. All right. Another question here. This is back to the big league club. David asks, suppose the Mets remain competitive. Do you think they should give Mauricio and Vientos a shot to shore up their holes at DH and left field? Obviously, how you judge what a shot is, they have at least had Vientos on the big league club, and it's very hard for a young player to find any momentum without playing consistently. And Vientos, you could say two things, right? Vientos really struggled up here. Vientos never really had a chance to get his feet under him. I think both those things are fair. And the crazy thing here is, Joe, when you look at it, they kind of did this to Alvarez. But Alvarez, who is just a totally different caliber of prospect player, I mean, an anomaly at his age for his position, in his small spurts, he just hit everything over the fence that it felt like his hand, Buck's, and not just Buck, the organization's hand was forced. It was, this guy is one of your difference makers. You have to play him. A lot of people can't do that. That's how special Alvarez is. Vientos has shown that he can't do that. He needs a legitimate chance. And then, of course, Mauricio, who I'm a little skeptical on that we'll see given the full floor this year, unless the Mets end up in August or September, more likely into full, not tank, but these games, the wins don't mean as much right now. Getting guys time is what matters.
And the question was, if the Mets remain competitive, if
Right.
they remain competitive, they're not selling. So where's the problem in left field? Tommy Pham has been one of the Mets' best hitters. So if Tommy Pham is still around playing left field, I don't think they have a hole there. There's certainly a potential hole at DH. Vogelback had a hot couple weeks, and then he cooled down again, and he's kind of been
then he
up and down since his
really
fun. And they got set. Yeah, so I don't know what's going on at DH. Would I like to give Mark Vientos an opportunity? Sure, I would. I said that last year. I said that last offseason. I said that when he got called up this year. So I'm kind of done saying it. They should give him a shot. It doesn't seem like they want to. There's not much we could do. But if they remain competitive, I would imagine what you would see them do is go try to trade for a couple relievers and shore up that bullpen more so than shore up the offense, because I still think the offense, as inconsistent as it has been, still a very talented offense. I mean, Brandon Nimmo, Starling Marte, Tommy Pham, Francisco Lindor, Brett Beatty is starting to turn it on again a little bit. Jeff McNeil, Pete Alonso, Francisco Alvarez. There's no reason that team shouldn't put up enough runs to be competitive. The problem is the starting pitching's not going deep into games, but you're going to have a full rotation. So there's no real, I don't know if there's room to trade for a starter, but you add a couple more relievers, and, if they are competitive, maybe that brings Edwin Diaz back into the fold, where maybe he comes back in September or something like that. Right. And, helps in a bit of a stretch run. I know his brother Alexis at the All-Star game said he's throwing at 125, 150 feet every day. So seems like he's progressing really well. And I imagine if the Mets are in it, they'll probably find a way to get Edwin Diaz back on the mound. And if they fall out of it, they'll tell him to just take his time, and we'll see him in Port St. Lucie in February.
Your conversation kind of sparked this thought in my head. I'm fascinated by the Mets deadline. Say they kind of tread water out of the gate. It's not that they play poorly enough that it's like, okay, blow it up, but they also don't play well enough that they're winning 7 out of 8 games. They're kind of just hovering a little bit. And you have to have these opportunities presented for them to happen, and they are hard to find at times. I wonder if the Mets try to do a little bit of both. I wonder if they say, the piece we're offered for David Robertson is just too good for us. We're going to take that prospect piece. But are there 2 relievers out there that are not David Robertson, but have, like Trevor Gott, we saw, right? And Gott's maybe on a lower scale, but buying contracts instead, right? I think because the Mets' financial advantage is very different, that they can do that. Because it's, Joe, let's be honest, it's hard to get answers in 10 days. It's hard. Maybe you do. Maybe they stink, or maybe they're awesome and you get the answers, whether you wanted it or you didn't. But the reality is the conversation we're going to be having around the deadline is a will they, won't they, and should they or should they not? And I think as we see, when you have that kind of financial power, maybe it's a little bit of both.
You could. I mean, there's been many examples of teams in the past buying and selling. So it's just a matter of accruing the most value. What's the most valuable way to build this team? Is it selling off this and buying this? And Steve Cohen, with the financial might, could he eat a contract to get a controllable reliever? And that could be a semblance of buying of sorts, but it's a reliever that you're going to have beyond this year. Obviously, I think if they just tread water, you wouldn't see them pursue rentals, like rental relievers, like Jordan Hicks, anyone like that. But it's definitely possible to think about doing both sides of the spectrum. And I would hope that Steve Cohen has prepared his management team that is something to at least keep on the back of their mind, because you don't know when these opportunities are going to pop up. Like the Mariners wanted out of Chris Flexen's money, and they're like, we'll give you something just to take on the salary. And obviously that's what led to Trevor Gott. So we'll see if there's opportunities similar to that over the next 3 weeks or so, because the deadline is sneaking up on us real quick. And like you said, Connor, it's 10 days. Guess what? Or 10 games. Those 10 games, that's the way it works. That's what's going to decide the Mets season. So the time is now. They have to get out of the gate really hot.
All right, our last one here, and to your point, yeah, there are a lot of competitive teams like the Mariners that they operate on a strict budget, and to make a trade at the deadline, they needed that $4 million off the books, so they were able to give the Mets something that maybe they didn't value that much anymore, but the Mets, there is something of value to got. All right, the last question comes from Steve Miller. Do you think Parada will get a shot at Double-A before the end of the year, Joe? He's been scorching hot since he came on the Mets pod.
The Mets pod push certainly putting Kevin Parada over the hump, but I wouldn't be shocked. They do this pretty often where he'll play like the whole season in Brooklyn, and then the last like week or two of the season, he'll get like a taste of Double-A. So he'll play 7 to 10 games in Double-A, something like that. If he keeps going at the rate that he is, I wouldn't be shocked if you saw Parada get that look to the level that he naturally would start 2024 at. You've seen them do that many times before over the last few years.
Yeah, with a guy like Parada, who's turning 22 the first week of August. So happy early birthday to Kevin Parada. I mean, taken in the top 15 of the draft, a college bat, a prolific college bat. If you start to see that green light come on in high A ball, like it has over the last, you'd say like 35 days or so, and it doesn't appear to be slowing down. I'm with you, Joe, to take a look in Double-A, because Parada's going to be in Double-A next year. So you get to learn where everything is. You get a feel for that team, and then you start off there next year and see if you can kind of replicate the same thing, right? Maybe get hot halfway through Double-A, work your way up to Triple-A. And, right now we're in like a little bit of a spoiled phase, because the Mets' biggest ray of hope is a 21-year-old that's just totally different at the position than what we're so used to seeing. But the reality is a lot of guys come up at 24, 25 years old as well. So it'll be exciting to track Parada along the way. And this is a great show. Joe, a huge thanks to you for all the work you do covering the draft. We always have a ton of fun with it. And now the beauty of it is we're not one of those shows that recaps the draft, and then in 4 years, maybe we'll talk about these guys again. We are anticipating tracking them closely. I know you'll be tracking them very closely, Joe, how they stack up in your Mets prospects list, and of course, how they do at the minor league level. This is the Mets pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. This summer, step out of the office and into the iconic with Cadillac, where the made-to-move sales event provides all the inspiration needed to set your email status to away. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac showroom for the made-to-move sales event today. And of course, remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much, everybody. Catch you next week.